started. Welcome everybody and thanks for joining us today. My name is Allie Breyer. I'm the ELGL Digital Coordinator and I'll be moderating today's discussion. ELGL is the Engaging Local Government Leaders Network. We engage the brightest minds in local government. One of the ways we do this is to provide exceptional and free online training about local government innovations and best practices. And one of the ways we do that is by partnering with some local organizations and businesses like Public Input. And so we're really excited to be on this webinar with them today. Today we're going to be talking about how government organizations are navigating virtual public engagement in light of social distancing, specifically as it relates to virtual public meetings. In this new landscape, there are plenty of questions about not only taking meetings online, but also what that means for public record laws. We'll be taking questions today via the comment box, text message, or you can call and leave a voicemail, and we'll get to all of those questions at the end. I'll hop to the next slide. We have two experts joining us today. Daniel Bevarly, who is the Executive Director of the National Freedom Information Coalition, which protects citizens' rights to open government, as well as Graham Stone of publicinput.com, a public engagement software company who is working with government organizations in over 30 states and communities as small as 600 residents and as large as over 1 million. Next slide. Here's what you can expect on the webinar today. We'll be talking about the challenges of virtual public meetings, states that give the green light, so reinvention versus replication. So this is the difference between reinventing public meetings and replicating public meetings. We'll talk about the current expectations of public record laws, addressing the two big challenges, security and equity, how we can avoid hijacking while maintaining best practices, and some examples of secure virtual meetings. So first, let's get on the same page about the current landscape of virtual public engagement. Graham, could you tell us a little bit about what you do at publicinput.com and some trends that you've been noticing in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you again, Allie, and to all of ELGL for having us. I know it's been a tremendous couple of weeks for you and your team. I see new content every day coming out. So thank you for keeping everybody on top of the latest resources, on top of the latest news. We're all kind of coming together as a community here. So we're really excited to be a part of that. The role that I play specifically here at Public Input is really one of observation and sharing, which I guess makes sense that I'm on this webinar. The fortune that we have in watching communities across the country of all sizes as they navigate this challenge is that then we can use our platform to really share what we see, things that are working, sometimes things that are not working. And that's really where I place a lot of my effort in trying to stay with the best practices, trying to coordinate with the experts that we have on staff here in the field of public involvement, and making sure that our product aligns with that and that our efforts to share this information are shared as widely as they can be. So I'm excited to have another chance at that today. The issue that we saw early on, and this is not something newsworthy at this point, but more of a foundation for the conversation today, is that amidst a worldwide sort of lockdown, we in government said, okay, just pause, right? Everything needs to be put on hold because we've never seen this before and we aren't sure what to do. So along with socialization, along with athletic activities and going to the gym and getting haircuts, our public meetings were also canceled. And that was fine. I think it was the appropriate thing to do. I had a conversation I mentioned a little while ago with the UNC School of Government, where their recommendation was, if it's not essential, stop. We don't know what to do about this right now. So rather than run outside of the boundaries of open meetings laws and various public records requirements, just pause. However, there are technologies that we quickly looked to as we started to realize this wasn't going to be a short-term thing. Social media live streaming was really the first one. If you want to hit the next slide for me, Hunter, The first one that that we said, that is a place where we can get our message in front of a lot of people very quickly, very easily. So that was a great start, and local governments started looking to this as a place to get meetings out to the public, having participation, those processes back in place. Unfortunately, though, there were some drawbacks that we realized very quickly, like the ability to only really broadcast rather than have a dialogue. As most of you are aware, a Facebook feed is intended to have a person or at least a room pushing information out to an audience, and the only place for them to participate is through the comment feed. And on a lot of social media platforms, you as a public commenter can delete that if you decide you don't like what you said the day before, and at the very least it's unmoderated, and there's really no way to capture any kind of records outside of someone's social media profile. So we looked to a little bit more participatory tools like Zoom, which we're actually using right now to share our screens. The Zoom conference calls, the WebEx conference calls, those are great tools that have existed for a long time to bring people together and have a meeting from multiple remote presenters. But in order to do that, we realized very quickly that provided some access control issues, the security drawbacks, where still the headlines today talk about how meetings have had to be shut down because of hijacking, because of trolling, offensive comments, people unmuting themselves and generally disrupting them. But there's also a couple of other challenges when we just look to conferencing tools off the shelf. The broadband or the application that's required, like we are today, I'm in front of my laptop computer and I'm using an upgraded broadband subscription that I had to call Spectrum and ask them for more when we all started working at home. Not everybody has that luxury. And also, going back to the comments, we aren't able to, and this is a lot of what Dan is going to talk about, we aren't able to make sure that our comments are attributed properly, that our comments are validated, and again, at the very least, structured so that we can address them appropriately in a public setting. The real issue, as we moved forward in looking to all these tools, was that the state started giving green lights. We recognized that the issue was going to be longer term, and if we look to for state of Virginia, I think we referenced Virginia. I referenced Texas and their attorney general a little while ago. All of those attorneys general started issuing general guidance on the suspension of specific aspects of Open Meetings Acts. The suspensions were, for the most part, I think, and it was in a majority of states, around the need to have people in a public space physically gathered, a quorum in a physical sense, right? They in suspending that did not suspend anything with regards to meetings notice, participation ability, and generally they all said we need to make sure that we are providing an open and transparent process, regardless of how you do that virtually. And so, as we do in the United States, right, leave the local governments, leave states to define what works best for their own communities. A federal guideline wasn't issued, and frankly, I tend to agree. Every community is going to deal with these differently, and we can't have one big response. So, in your community, are online meetings legal? There, though, aside from legal guidance, is the personal story of accessibility. In having these meetings move forward, are we bringing everybody into the process? The attorneys general say we need to have an open and transparent meeting. I told a personal story last week in a webinar we gave. I'll give a shortened version of it today. This is a Zoom call with my family. And we were on a family reunion of sorts the other weekend. You can see the frame at the bottom is me and my little family. And the thing that we'll play a little game with here is I'll let you in on a secret. nobody on this call is over the age of 65. And that's not because there aren't people in our family that are over the age of 65. The matriarch of our family was invited and was a part of the organization of this. And when it came time to log in and download the application and get time, she couldn't read the fonts on her computer to read the meeting ID and the access code. So she said, "I'm sorry, guys, I can't figure out how to make it." And if that is a challenge at a family level where a personal reunion is taking place, how many over 65 are we leaving out? How many people who just aren't tech savvy? I won't even assign just an age bracket to that. How many non-tech savvy people are we leaving out of the conversation? The other thing that we realized is that we look at tech savvy as one access issue. We need to also consider that access to broadband or laptops in general is widely inequitable in this country. The stats that Pew put out have been widely touted by us in the online engagement industry. You've probably seen this from us, from other online survey providers, or anything trying to tout the value of the internet. But they do ring really clearly when 35% of minorities rely on their mobile phone for internet. They do not have a traditional broadband connection. So are we truly providing that kind of accessibility to not just people who are less tech savvy, but also people who don't have access to computers, to broadband like we're using today? So to summarize kind of that lay of the land, we've seen as states roll out those green lines, states say we need to make sure that this is going to continue. Our public processes don't go on hold indefinitely. Two big challenges. Security, we can talk about till the cows come home. Zoom bombing has become a phrase that I'm sure Webster's will introduce to the dictionary in the next couple of years because of idle hands, because of the lack of preparation we had for this kind of a need. We need to be concerned about who we do, so that they will not be disrupted, they will not be hacked or hijacked, and we can have a program that won't have to be cut short. The casualty in this, though, for the sake of security, the cost has been accessibility. And that's really why we brought Dan from the National Freedom of Information Coalition to the call today, because that is really something we can fix. And if we have guidance from the people who focus in their careers on this, we can make sure that the solutions we bring forth every next time to introduce Dan, the National Freedom of Information Coalition, and really what they are looking at these unprecedented times. Thank you for joining us today, Dan. It's really great to have your guidance and mentorship through this.
Oh, thank you, Graham, and thank you, Ali, and thank you, ELGL, for inviting me to be here. This is a topic that's very near and dear to our organization. And just to tell you a little bit about the National Freedom of Information Coalition, if you saw the logo there, you saw 30 years. This is a 30-year organization. Our focus is state and local public institutions, any agencies that are covered by their state's open government laws. We're a coalition of coalitions that include about 37 states that have open government and NFOIC groups that operate within them. The organization was created through a number of state press associations 30 years ago who found having trouble to access their state governments for records and for access to meetings and that. And they joined together and worked with the Knight Foundation to receive some funding. And this has grown since that time. I've been with them for about 3 years now. And this has been and will probably always be a strong foundation in journalism. But one of the things that we're doing is broadening this audience or to further outreach. My background is not in journalism. I spent 13 years working in local government, in mayor's office, economic development. I've done my shares of public meetings. the 2 a.m., 3 a.m. meetings to let everybody have an opportunity to speak. Been there, done that. So we keep an eye on what's going on at the local and state level. We are about reforms, whether they're legislative reforms to help increase access and transparency, or if they're policy reforms in sharing best practices or develop professional standards to help public institutions do a better job of managing public engagement around meetings and public information management when it comes to records management. So those are areas that we're very much keeping an eye on. And so a little story here. I'm hoping that many of you all have heard of something called Sunshine Week. And that's an event that happens every March. It happens during the week of James Madison's birthday, President Madison. And it's an opportunity. It was started by the American Society of Newspaper Editors to recognize open government around the country. And so this year, when we were ready to launch Sunshine Week, it just happened to time with all of everything hitting the fan and all of the states and local governments being hit, as well as any institution out there, individuals as well, with the problems here. Our feelings have always been, when it came down to public engagement, and that is that, this use, and just to go back, I'm sure most of you all have heard of something called Gov 2.0, taking it from somebody who considers himself Gov 2.old, that was there when this thing kind of got started. The promises of this technology in terms of e-government and e-practices for government to be able to manage their affairs and their programs and services online. So we have always been with the idea that certainly with all the technologies that exist out there, transferring these engagement and these public records management services to the web should be something that these public institutions have that capability. Although we've all known and seen over the last 15, 20 years, what has happened in this is that a lot of commercial-based technologies have come in, and governments have used a lot of these to be able to manage on a limited basis these practices. But of course, when this happened during Sunshine Week, and we started to see, Hunter, if you want to hit that next slide there, we started to see jurisdiction after jurisdiction to rescind and retrench from their open government laws. For the sake of efficient decision making. And it was obviously very concerning to us to see these things happening. I mean, we knew that there were challenges, and as Graham mentioned earlier, in these public engagement processes, if it wasn't essential for particular bodies to meet, certainly boards and commissions and that, then to put off those meetings until at a later date. But obviously the information around the virus, what was happening, the data, and having access to that, many people were having trouble to do that. We heard from many journalists about how they were not being allowed into public meetings. Many agencies were just literally not taking public records requests. I mean, we understand, and I think everybody understands, if a document you're looking for is a paper document and it's in a file cabinet somewhere in archives, and those archives is in a closed building, certainly that's not going to be accessible at the time. But to literally tell journalists and the public, we're not accepting public records requests. So we were really concerned about the challenges that were going on within these agencies as well. And so we started to look out around the different jurisdictions to see exactly what was happening in these different areas here. We talked with a number of other journalism groups that were recording these instances around the country, and just trying to decide how do we move this process forward here? What are the challenges that these public institutions have to meet? Well, certainly, from my experience and your all's knowledge there as well, some of the trends we're seeing here is that there is a lot more litigation occurring today through journalism groups. A number of philanthropies are funding legal litigation alternatives when public records are denied, when access to public meetings are denied as well. And so that's a cost factor that public institutions have to be able to appreciate well, because many of these cases, it's public dollars that are being used to pay for the fines and fees when they violate these laws. The costs are growing to collect and organize public information and public engagement, but at the same time, there's a political benefit. One of the things that we have definitely seen a correlation between is trust and transparency. And when transparency disappears, so does trust. And not only does it disappear, then you start to get ideas of suspicion in there, misinformation, disinformation, social media, social networks out there that people will turn to for information are not necessarily reliable sources for information. I'm sure you've all seen different cases of that as well. And the idea that the technologies that we do know that there are technologies out there to be able to replicate, not reinvent these processes. You know, I go back to, you know, the days before, you know, the virtual meetings and that, when you could go to almost any city in the country, sit in on their city council meeting, and the format and the process is almost the same depending on where you go. But in a virtual environment, we're seeing new things tried. We're seeing this reinvention of this 250-year-old practice called democracy. And it's not pretty in all the cases, as we've been seeing right now to where we are. So certainly one of the things that we're looking for out there is to encourage, you know, public institutions to be able to take all those things that happen in a public meeting environment and replicate those online. Everything from the notifications, the document management, the streaming, however format that might be, whether it's audio, video, whether it's online, whether it's on the television screen, whatever, but being able for people to do that in real time, and then to be able to collect public comment from the individuals that we know is public comment, it's attributable and validated by the person who's providing that comment that they are one of your constituents. And then again, at the end, be able to provide that information out in terms of the outcomes of those deliberations, whether it's documentation, or streaming at another time for someone who can't make that particular meeting, but at least attempt those main characteristics. You know, we've seen a number of cases where meetings have been interrupted by technology glitches and the meetings continue. We've seen a number of cases where meetings have happened, not streamed, but recorded and then posted at another time where citizens didn't have an opportunity to participate. And then again, you know, the idea of the Zoom meetings where you have people coming in from everywhere, not even knowing if these are your constituents that you're addressing in these meetings or not, are going to be challenging there. So there's a lot of challenges when you try to reinvent a process as opposed to replicate that. So, you know, going through this here, we should be able to not only replicate these processes. If you think about what the purpose of technology is supposed to help you do a process at least the same way and really increase and enhance that experience. So when we see governments retrenching and just saying we're not going to have these meetings or we're not going to provide the information, you know, we know it's a challenge, but we believe it's doable. You know, the mistakes are going to be made, but we're at a time right now that this is the opportunity to be able to have that trial and error and make these things happen here. So we know that we can minimize friction by people working together, whether it's the press or whether it's your public, to be able to participate in those processes. And through all these cases here, just the standard way of how you develop professional standards and best practices to be able to move through these processes here and come out on the end of a much more meaningful experience for people and to increase and enhance your public engagement. I mean, what we're looking for is that once this pandemic is over, we don't go back to the way it was, that governments realize that using the technology the right way is a way to be able to engage your audience and not only increase participation, but increase trust in government and be able to meet the needs, the information needs of your communities as well. So, Graham?
Yeah, thanks. And, you know, to echo that last statement, not just using technology to meet a need right now, but using technology to look as we progress, we learn to apply in the future. There are a number of different places that I could quote as having said, this is a way that we should operate from here on out. And it's funny you mentioned, you know, going back to that sort of 250-year-old institution. You know, we've in the past referenced, you know, going back to sort of Grecian times, right, and having those first democratic meetings, and as a software, you know, we try to avoid being lumped in the party that says a public meeting isn't really valuable anymore. We really do feel like there is no better place to exchange ideas, to be heard, than in a face-to-face setting. So replicating that rather than reinventing what it means is exactly how we'd like to pursue this challenge. Trying to summarize a little bit, we've taken the last month or so, and like I said earlier, having watched communities across the country roll out solutions that range from just live streaming on YouTube or Facebook to using our software or to plugging in their own solutions. These are kind of the 5 core tenets that we think need to be checked in order to say that there is really a true public meeting, and you have replicated the process rather than reinvented it. Of course, in the immediate, we need to have multiple people presenting remotely. I'm in my guest room. There is a a mostly made bed behind me, and Dan is in his office. So we're using technology to come together as if we're in the same room. But while doing that, we're also making sure that any comments we receive are captured, they're moderated. So the comment box that many of you are seeing there, that is moderated, so profanity will not make its way through. The other really key part is that accessibility for open access, easy open access for those without broadband or without a personal computer. I saw a comment from our friend Rusty down in Florida, and I appreciate the correction there, because it's very true. A lot of people over the age of 65 are far more tech savvy than even I am. I, full disclosure, am not the brains behind any of this software, and could never imagine to be. So that isn't to say it's just an age issue, but it is an issue we need to contend with. Do people have an understanding? Do they have the ability to access software? And of course, lastly, right, we need to protect against hijacking, against trolling. Public meetings are always going to have people who have dissenting opinions. That's not what we want to worry about. We want to worry about those who are out to distract from anything relevant and just cause chaos. And so keeping them out of the meeting without detracting from the openness. And Dan, I would look back to you asking if there's anything that you would add to that as from your perspective, given that these are kind of our distilled points to make sure that everybody is checking.
Yeah, I think these are all really good points, Graham, because I think, one thing is from being in public service, and for those who are in public service, that your audience is not a specific group of people in your jurisdiction. It's everyone in your jurisdiction. And so you have to remember what the disenfranchised audience that you have, as well as your tech savvy group who might, come right into an environment like this and operate without a problem. But you've got to be able to meet everyone on where they are with their level of tech savviness and capabilities. And so, yeah, I agree. I mean, we know that this isn't a case, government and government decision making is incremental, and it's incremental for a reason, because it's inclusive. And so this is really important that you are inclusive in when you go into these environments to be able to make sure that you meet the needs of all your constituents out there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The corners of the community, right, and making sure that we serve them and reach them. I always try to take a second, though, as we move forward and point out that this is not a solution that isn't being achieved. Actually, Dan pointed out the city of Miami held about a month ago their own virtual public meeting where they did achieve a very comprehensive approach to making sure people could call in, they could submit comments, they could participate via Zoom or watch in a streaming fashion. There was all of the boxes, I think, checked in this early effort, and we are always impressed by IT departments taking up the lead and making sure that these kinds of solutions are available for their elected officials, for their staff. The interesting point that was made as a part of this discussion, though, was just how much workload those IT folks are undertaking, how much it's pulling them away from what they had dealt with, on a day-to-day basis normally. This particular tweet from the CIO, or the IT team lead over at the city of Miami, Mike Sarasti, points out, and if you look at the top right picture that he used, that's his station with 5, I think, monitors and a switchboard to run this virtual meeting that did check all those boxes. He said in a response later in the thread on that Twitter chat that they integrated Zoom, Granicus, Qualtrics, Facebook, Cisco, and WeTransfer to achieve all of that. So unbelievable amount of respect for making that happen, but it does bring up the point that IT teams are the ones bearing the brunt of this effort. We've seen that as kind of one of the primary observations in watching this. There are very capable teams making this happen on their own. And if you want to hop to the next slide for me, Hunter, in addition though to the IT teams facing the brunt of that pressure, we also see that access is being politicized to block projects. I was on a call not too long ago where there was a particular development project on the docket, and a particular council member had lined up people to speak against it. But those people, for whatever reason, right, couldn't get through. It was a WebEx call, and they weren't able to hop on, and it was clear that that was not the expectation that the council member had in mind. So they had to move forward, and there was a vote, and they moved forward on the rezoning in this case. But what happens then is you open yourself up to people who are opposed, right? And giving you, a reason to have to retract that or reopen those things. We don't want to have to create more work because people have an avenue to worry about the accessibility. And this is a lot of what Dan is talking about, making sure that we are adhering to all of those things. We are protecting ourselves and the decisions we're making and how we came to those decisions. But on the brighter side, costs per engagement. We looked down in Florida at, speaking of Rusty down there, we looked at one of their FHWA case studies through the Everyday Counts initiative, and they had actually touted over 50% cut in cost running virtual meetings versus traditional meetings. These were costs achieved because of the need to commute and the having a rental of a place and the infrastructure for people to participate, rather than being able to do it through technology. So there is opportunity to save money and to increase inclusivity if we embrace these technologies. But we need to remember that IT folks have to go back to some of the things that they were worried about before. Ransomware is always going to be an issue, an increasing issue. Open data, open government efforts, all the things that they had already been managing. And so what does this look like? We'll touch really quickly on our particular software here and the way that we see it. We need to make sure if we're going to have an open and accessible meeting that is also secure from hijacking or trolling, that you've essentially given 2 rooms for these discussions to take place in. The first is the sort of open public access, we'll call it the viewing forum, right? A place for everybody to come, and a place that you all on this call are actually in right now. You are either phoned in or watching our live stream of this. You're not actually in our Zoom meeting, but you are getting the feel of being in this meeting. You are watching us sort of in a fishbowl, I guess. And our software is patching all of that communication through to our Zoom call, which is just the technology we're using to share our screens. So the goal here really is to give us a room to have our presentation, the public a room to participate, and then using our software as that open access sort of participatory element. outside of the academic description of that, cities are doing that. Communities and regional planning organizations are doing that now. We're really excited to have some of the early adopters and the forward thinkers come to us and say, look, we either don't have the IT capability in-house, or we don't want to have to think about this solution. Can you just help us make it happen? So whether it was Gulf Shores, who had both remote and socially distanced, of course, and if you notice our friend here in the top left wearing a mask, having their city council meeting using some of the tools. We also had the folks over at Sarasota Manatee MPO having their board meeting in the same fashion, everybody remote, but making sure that it was a publicly accessible format, and making sure that people had multiple and redundant ways to participate. And that's a key that I've been echoing a lot. Some of the guidance, some of the legal guidance coming out of this one was a particular law firm interpreting the Attorney General's statement up in Illinois, but multiple and redundant ways for the public to participate and watch. So they could call in and listen, they could view online, and they could comment on this in the box here on the right, like you all are able to, or also leave a voice message, as you can see in your screens at the top. If you're online, there's a number to call in and leave a voicemail. And so a lot of these different communities, whether it's up in Alabama, I think Williamsburg in Virginia was probably the first to do this. But the point is, our goal as a company is to take the burden off of IT to help make this something achievable for every community, and make sure that that there isn't a risk of having that right ahead of the meeting moment where you think everything's in line and then someone's on mute or someone can't call in. Those technological hiccups that are universally known at this point. So we're excited to be able to provide that as a company focused on open public engagement. And I mentioned that everybody here can look to some of those tools. The ability for you to participate in a variety of formats. The truth is, we're using our own technology right now to show you what that feel is, the public's feel for coming to a meeting, dropping in essentially, making sure that we've provided notice ahead of time in our emails and ELGL's correspondence, knowing that you can just drop in at this web address or call the number and watch the presentation, take it in, or if you want, then participate, right? Call in or text in or leave a comment, whatever suits you. And so we wanted to make sure that this was something that you could experience. And what we'll do now is really take the opportunity. We've got about 20 minutes left. Take the opportunity to have, Dan is on the line and his experience. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions on our end. But take the opportunity to answer any questions that have come in. Or if you want, take the opportunity now to comment on the box there. If you want to call in and leave us a voicemail, we can play that in the meeting. Whatever comes to mind with the conversation we've been having so far. And maybe Allie, I'll let you take it from here. If there are any questions that have come up, we can answer those.
Great. Let's maybe start with the question around moderating public questions. So this is from Oliver. And Oliver asks, isn't there the possibility of unintended bias from the moderator of the question submitted for answering?
Okay, so unintended bias. So the moderator, certainly in the sense that they only, I suppose, play questions, but these are all recorded for public records automatically. So everything that comes in is attached not only to the meeting, but to a personal profile. That's one of the core components of our software, of our platform, in general. We treat every individual as sort of an ongoing person and persona in the database for that community. If you have contributed to maybe a parks plan or a long range transportation plan in the past, you are given an actual identification in our system, in our resident database. And then if you come to a public meeting, maybe a year later, if you participate in that, you'll be recorded as just an ongoing story, right? That person has now come to two things, and none of that is able to be deleted or removed. So I think that certainly they could moderate what questions are fielded by council, just like the city clerk or town clerk could in a reading off of any email submitted comments. But I do think that one of the big things we need to be careful about is public records requests and having all of that in a place and organized. Dan, I know a lot of what you focus on is open records acts. Anything to add as far as things we need to make sure?
No, I just think that that all of that, it goes for the type of public records that you're requesting. We're seeing a lot of challenges for people just trying to get access to native formats of public records that are requested. So I think one thing you want to make sure that when people are looking for certain documents, whatever that format is that they're looking for, that they be provided those records in those native formats as well. That's really important. It took a state law in Colorado to pass that, but people that were trying to get spreadsheets, that type of thing that they wanted to be able to work with, were getting PDF files and that, which didn't help them out. So certainly whatever is being presented in these meetings that considered public records, that they be provided in those native formats that they have.
That's
Great.
a good point.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think the native formats is a really good point. And to just make sure I was clear on answering the question about the moderation, what our system does from a software perspective is hide it from the public view if it is considered profane or toxic, but it does not remove it from the public record. That will be put into the back end alongside all the other questions.
Right. Another question that came up was around town meeting governance. So our town has town meeting governance. Any number from between 25 to 600 show up. Has anyone thought how to address this to ensure social distancing?
In the current time, huh? Dan, so as far as we're worried, our solution is intended to help provide a virtual replacement, not reinvention of that. Intending to simulate that feeling, but I think it is down to local. If we're looking, at the ordinance at those levels, what's allowed. States have issued their guidance, but when it comes to municipalities, local governments, I think that there's going to be a lot of variation. Any experience on your end, Dan?
If there's a way to gauge your audience, that's a pretty wide range of attendees to come to these meetings here. So based on the nature of the meeting, certainly one that might be considered much larger in attendance than maybe a smaller one is certainly to look at other venues besides City Hall or the county courthouse, or to have these meetings where you're going to expect a large turnout of people. I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to get a head count on some of these things. I wouldn't go into asking names and addresses and that, because it's, that's not part of the public meeting process to be able to show up. But at least to get kind of some numbers out there to get an idea. And there's no reason why you cannot rotate where you're having these meetings. They don't always have to happen within the government agencies or the offices themselves.
Great, thank you. Let's see, we have another question. How do you combat federal guidelines which require traditional in-person meetings when federal funds are being used for projects?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. We've heard that a few times. And so what we are looking at is the FHWA's recent, their virtual public involvement recommendations, their case studies, and actually they featured just a couple of weeks ago the virtual public hearings that Florida DOT was hosting as a case study and as an option. So I can't say that the FHWA has given specific permission to replace in-person meetings with virtual, but they are certainly, I think, signaling that when done correctly, these can be considered acceptable. I actually appreciate that question. Scott Allen is the head of the VPI effort at Everyday Counts 5. And I might actually send him a message and ask for some specific guidance on that. If everybody can give us a couple days to turn around, see if we can get some real specific permission on that, because there hasn't been those types of like attorneys general, for instance, statements made yet.
Let's see. Thank you for that. I don't have any more questions coming in. Did anybody have any other questions they wanted to ask our presenters?
Okay.
Doesn't look like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that the primary thing that we need to remember is that we're talking about meetings a lot. This is a conversation that was catalyzed by the crisis, and whether it's the Charleston City Council member who early on said that this is the way we should be doing business in the future, if it's the tweet from the City of Miami's CIO that said this is an indication of how we should be doing things. This is what we're learning right now, is really preparing us for how to do business down the road. If we take what we learn and make sure that we don't forget this, then we will be so much farther down the road once the crisis, we recover from the crisis, once we're able to start bringing people back into the public and having more traditional meetings. Those can be supplemented with meetings like this. We are seeing such an increase in participation across the country that this is really something that we shouldn't let go of. Dan and I were talking earlier about some of the other industries that are using this tragedy, this crisis, as a chance to learn like they've never learned before. Environmental impacts are probably one of the biggest opportunities for us, as I'm sure everybody's seen pictures of Delhi and the smog and the reduction in nitrate that have been produced in China. You look at those heat maps, those environmental impacts. I mean, where there were dolphins in Italy coming up the canals. So what scientists, what environmentalists are looking at as an opportunity to learn, we should be doing the same thing. These are, as actually ELGL hosted a webinar just the other day with the Davenport Institute out in Pepperdine, and one of their guests over at the city of Riverside, if I remember correctly, had said, this is a time when it's okay to make mistakes. The main thing that we need to do is our best. And Dan echoed this too. I give you an opportunity to comment on this, but we don't have another chance to learn from this. We can't redo it. And honestly, and Dan, take over and let me know what you think. But now is the time to make mistakes and learn and get better at this. We're all giving each other some leeway. Any thoughts on that, Dan, before we?
Yeah, just to echo what you said, it's okay to make mistakes if you're trying to improve the process around public engagement and public information management. This is an opportunity that we will not have again. And what we've seen early on with some of these jurisdictions that have retrenched from their responsibilities to their constituents. Our concern is that if you don't try to make this work, when we get back to whatever that next normal is going to be, that we've actually set back our efforts for engagement. And that all has to do with the need. Our democracy is really challenged right now from all different angles, whether it's the public institutions, whether it's the media, or whether it's a polarized public out there. And the only way to have these conversations, the only way to move forward is to have these conversations, and any kind of efforts to be able to manage that in an online environment, as long as you are meeting those other needs that your public has to do this, then it's okay to make those mistakes, but at least make something happen and to look at some of the technologies. Like I said, there's a lot of commercial type technologies that a lot of public institutions use that have worked on a limited scale. But there are truly unique needs in the public sector in terms of how you communicate and share information with your constituents. And those things have to be taken into consideration, or you lose privacy, you lose trust, and you lose control, of some of these meetings if you don't include those. Government works with guardrails, and so you need to be able to stay within those guardrails. And like I said, it's doable. It's doable.
Yeah, and I think the quote that Dan had said earlier in some of our prep for this was that the real mistake is to miss the opportunity that we have in front of us. So, I'm excited about having those conversations, hearing people who have tried all variety of things. And before we, like I said, move on, there was one more comment that came in, not necessarily a question, but saying that based on some research as somebody in the public involvement space, that they saw some guidance from the Department of the Interior, Department of the Army on virtual public involvement. Additionally, there was some guidance coming out of the Texas DOT that said that virtual public involvement rules, had recently been approved. I think it was the environmental toolkit out of TxDOT saying virtual public involvement rules being recently approved by FHWA. So hinting in that direction, but I appreciate the opportunity to follow up with specific guidance on that. What I wanted to close out on is as we're getting to the end of our time here is the reopening of states. We have reached the point where a lot of states are determining for themselves that they have successfully flattened the curve. This isn't a conversation about whether that's right or wrong. This is a conversation about it happening. And the truth is they need data in order to do that effectively. And they need data from their residents. As I speak right now, I'm listening to the helicopters overhead. I live in downtown Raleigh, North Carolina, where it's 1 o'clock on Tuesday, so the weekly Reopen NC protest is happening. Those are data points that governors need. They also need data points from people who say that they are not ready to reopen. So we look to places like Hillsborough in Florida, Hillsborough County, which is the Tampa Bay area. And so they are full disclosure, they use our software. They put out a survey, I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago, as you can see in the article here. They're looking for the public's input on their response to the virus. And so not only are we seeing that states, that communities need data to make these decisions, but people want to provide that feedback. This was a snapshot I took this morning of their dashboard. In the last 7 days, over 10,000 people have participated in that survey. 30,000 have subscribed for updates via either text message or email to keep them informed of where the county is on their reopening strategy, on the services they're providing. It's just a cry for input from the people who live in these communities and from the staff who are tasked with making really challenging decisions, the elected officials who have to make a decision. And if we're going to make good decisions, this is really our soapbox as a company, the thing that we can't say enough. You cannot find good data in just one format. It can't be an online survey and nothing else. Hillsborough County is supplementing that online engagement with text message surveys in order to make sure that if people don't have access to a computer or see it in the newspaper, they can subscribe or they can shoot out these texts to make sure people can participate that way. If it's social media that reaches another corner, if it's phone in comments, if it's meetings like we're having today, it doesn't matter. We have to use all of those different tools in order to find the good data that we can make decisions on. We have to use, we call it mixed mode formats in order to eliminate some of the bias that's inherent when you look to just social media or just online surveys or just public meetings. We need to increase the data set. We need to improve the data we have to make a decision. But we also have to make sure that this isn't just a one-time thing. This, again, is the opportunity to build an understanding of our community. And that's where we as a software also get excited. The ability to connect the dots across these interactions. I mentioned earlier, people are participating in Hillsborough County. This is the map of those participants as they see in their dashboard. But I also want to say, understanding those people, those individuals across all the different efforts that they might be contributing to. If it's a parks plan, if it's a long range plan, if it's even just feedback on an inconsequential. I saw in I think it was up in Austin. I saw there was a survey that has city council members and their pictures. Those types of really tangible things. Virginia Beach is a great example that used art in the park as a place for people to come and participate, but grow that database of people who live in those places so that they can reach back out to them when there are more important things that they need to contribute to, like hurricane preparedness in the case of Virginia Beach. But when we do that, when we integrate all these modes, and I appreciate everybody who on this call clearly understands that public involvement isn't just a transactional process dependent on a project requiring it. We're looking at building a relationship, building an understanding of your community by bringing all that together, putting it in a place where you can refer back to it, you can report, you can close the communication loop with the people who live in your community and build that trust, like Dan mentioned earlier. So that's where we as a software really, really work to plug in. Meetings are right now what we're focused on because it was a crisis that required a response, and we were glad to be in a position. But with that, I want to turn it back over to Allie, and I do want to thank Dan again for joining us. The time that he's taken to talk with us, to make sure that we're looking at the right issues, and to share his knowledge with everyone here. I very much appreciate it, Dan.
Oh, thank you, Graham. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me. And Allie, I appreciate it as well. And ELGL, you all doing good work.
Thank you. Yeah, huge thanks to both of you for presenting with us. It's been such a pleasure to have you. And huge thanks to everybody who is on the call today. This is going to be, has been recorded, and we'll be sharing it around with video and slides. And with that, I'll end today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.